She had been reclassifying $3,900,000 of foundation assets as operational expenses for 8 years, and she smiled at every donor dinner we shared during all of them. Her name was Diane Forsyth. She wore navy at every spring luncheon and cream at every fall one. She had a way of touching the rim of her wine glass before she spoke, as if she were about to make a toast, and people leaned in for it every time. The board called her steady. The donors called her devoted. I called her my partner because that's what the bylaws said she was. I am Victoria Ashford Crane. The foundation carries my family's name. My grandmother started it in 1978. By 2014, when Diane and I were named co-directors, the endowment sat at $6,200,000. By 2022, on paper, it still did. On paper. There is a small printed card I want you to picture. The seating chart for our annual donor luncheon. For 7 years, my name was placed beside Diane's at the head of the table. The same calligrapher every season. The same heavy cream stock. 3 weeks before the audit findings landed, I asked the office manager to move my name. Far end of the table. No explanation given. That card comes back 4 times. The last time it appears, Diane will be the only one at the head of the table. If you have ever watched someone mistake your silence for weakness, stay with me. And if this story speaks to you, subscribe to my channel for more stories like this, because elegance does not mean surrender. The first luncheon I want to walk you through is the one in 2014, the inaugural one for the two of us as co-directors. Spring, the Hartford Club. Hydrangeas, because Diane insisted on hydrangeas. I had wanted peonies. She said peonies looked unserious in photographs and the board photographer was coming. I let her have the hydrangeas. I told myself it was a small thing. The truth is, in that first year, I let her have a great many small things, because I was 38 and she was 52 and she had been on the board for a decade longer than I had. She had what my grandmother used to call a vocabulary of authority. She knew how to say the word fiduciary at a dinner table without making it sound rehearsed. That night, the seating chart had us beside each other at the center of the long table. My name in calligraphy. Hers in calligraphy. Our 2 cards almost touching. I remember picking mine up between courses and turning it over for no reason. There was nothing on the back. I put it down again. Diane raised her glass and made a short toast about continuity, about the women who had built this foundation and the women who would carry it. She looked at me when she said it. She had a particular skill for looking at one person while addressing a room. The donors watched her do it. They smiled. They felt addressed and observed at once. It was a small piece of theater, and she was very good at it. I did not know yet that 2 years later she would slide a bylaw amendment into a board meeting I would miss. That was the first red flag, though I would not name it as one until much later. Spring 2016. I was in London for a family matter. My uncle had died, and there were estate things that could not be done by phone. Diane sent me an email the morning of the board meeting saying she would handle the agenda and brief me when I returned. She used the word routine twice in 3 paragraphs. I remember that because I went back and counted years afterward. The amendment she introduced gave the co-director, either co-director, the authority to approve vendor payments under $50,000 without a second signature. She framed it as an efficiency measure. The minutes describe a brief discussion and a unanimous vote. 3 board members were absent. I was one of them. 2 others were on a Zoom line that, according to a footnote, experienced intermittent connectivity. When I came back, she handed me a 1-page summary. She said, "I cleaned up some of the cash flow friction while you were away." She used that phrase, cash flow friction, as if our foundation's controls were a wrinkled tablecloth and she had simply ironed it. I thanked her. I signed the acknowledgement. I went back to the work. I want you to understand something about that period of my life. My mother had just been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. My daughter was finishing her last year at Choate and applying to schools. I was running our family's other obligations and showing up at the foundation 3 days a week. I was paying attention, But I was paying attention the way a busy woman pays attention to a partner she trusts, which is to say, I was reading the top line. I was not reading the ledger. That is how it happens. Not in one big theft. In a quiet column added to a template I had never been shown. In 2015, before I missed the meeting, before the amendment, Diane updated our internal accounting template. She told the board it was a minor formatting change. A new line item, listed under operating costs, called Discretionary Operational Reserve, DOR, in the spreadsheet. A neutral, beige, forgettable abbreviation. It did not appear in our public filings. It did not appear in the donor reports. It existed only in the internal ledger Diane reviewed with our outside CPA each quarter. I never saw the template. The CPA saw the template. The CPA at that time was a man named Howard Linnett, who had been with the foundation since 1991. He was sharp. He would have asked questions. Which brings me to the second red flag, the CPA rotation. 2019. Howard called me on a Tuesday in late August. He was retiring. He said it gently, the way a man tells you a thing he has been turning over in his mouth for months. He said the foundation deserved a fresh set of eyes. He said he had loved working with my grandmother, and with my mother, and with me. He did not say anything about Diane. I remember noticing the absence of her name in his goodbye, but I attributed it to the long history he had with my family. People focus on the line they're closest to. A week later, Diane brought a name to me, a small firm in West Hartford. She said she had asked around, and they had a strong reputation with private foundations our size. I had never heard of them. She slid the engagement letter across her desk, already signed by their managing partner. She said the transition needed to happen quickly because Howard's last day was in 6 weeks, and we had a Q4 close coming. I signed. I will not pretend otherwise. I read the letter, I asked 2 questions about their fee structure, and I signed. That was when I stopped listening to her tone and started reading the numbers. Except, I want to be honest with you. That moment did not happen in 2019. It happened in 2021. The line is dramatic. The truth was slower. Let me take you to the 2019 gala. The fall luncheon that year was larger than usual. 60 guests. We had brought in 2 new donor families, both from out of state, and the board wanted a strong evening. Diane wore navy. I wore charcoal. The seating card with my name was placed again beside hers at the center. Between the salad and the entree, one of the new donors, an older gentleman named Walter Mears, who had made his money in industrial real estate, asked me a question about our grant disbursement timing. He had made a 5-year pledge, and he wanted to understand when his contribution would touch the programs he cared about. It was a reasonable question. It was the kind of question a donor of his caliber asks, politely, between courses. I gave him an answer that was almost right. Almost. I told him our typical disbursement lag was 4 to 6 weeks from the close of a quarter. He nodded. Then he said, "That is interesting. I noticed in your last annual report, the operating costs ran higher than I'd expected for an endowment your size, about 6% higher than the comparable institutions I follow." He said it kindly. He was not interrogating. He was a man who read footnotes for pleasure. I smiled and told him I would look into it and follow up. Diane, 2 seats down, had heard. She turned her head slightly. She caught my eye and gave me the small, reassuring smile she gave the donors. She said, across Walter's wife, "Walter, the operating ratio looks high because we did 3 program expansions last year. Victoria can send you the breakdown." Walter said, "That would be lovely." The rest of the dinner proceeded. Diane raised her glass at dessert and made a toast about partnership, about the foundations that endure because the women who run them know how to listen. I remember picking up my place card that night. I do not remember why. I turned it over. There was nothing on the back of it, the same as in 2014. I put it down. I told myself I would pull the operating ratio in the morning. I did pull it. I pulled the public version. It looked correct, given the program expansions. I sent Walter the breakdown. He thanked me. The room did not know what I knew yet. I want to be careful here, because in 2019, I did not know anything. I had a number from a careful donor and a soft answer from my partner. That was all. But something had shifted. A thin, papery feeling, like a draft under a door you cannot find. I want to bring up the third red flag now, because it sits in this same period, and you need it before we go further. Early 2022, Diane proposed renaming the Foundation's annual lecture series after her late father, Henrik Forsyth. He had been a respected economist at Yale, and he had given the inaugural lecture in 1986 when my grandmother first invited him. The proposal arrived on the board's January agenda as a naming consideration. She made the case at the meeting. She had prepared remarks. She said Henrik had been instrumental in the Foundation's early intellectual identity. She said the family would be honored. She said she had spoken with 2 of the older board members, both of whom had known Henrik personally, and they were enthusiastic. I voted in favor. So did everyone else. It passed unanimously. In hindsight, I understood what I was watching. A woman who has been quietly draining an institution, attempting, near the end, to bind her family's name to its public face. A legacy stitch. A way of making any future scandal feel like a betrayal of her father, not just of her partner. It is the kind of move that only makes sense if you know something is about to break. She knew. I want to walk you to the moment that did change me. The night I pulled the 2021 annual report at home, alone, and found the gap. It was a Sunday in February 2022. My husband was upstate at our other house. My daughter was in her final semester at law school. The dog was asleep on the rug. I had a glass of Barolo and the report in front of me on the kitchen island. The kitchen island is white marble. I mention it because that is where the document was sitting when my hand stopped moving. I had been comparing the 2021 internal ledger Diane had circulated to the board with the public-facing summary. They aligned. They almost always aligned. But that night, I was reading the program expense allocations against the previous 3 years, looking for trend variance because I had been quietly preparing a 5-year strategic memo for our spring meeting. The 2021 program expense line was $47,000 light against my projection. $47,000. A small number, in the context of a $6.2 million endowment. A small enough number that any explanation would have absorbed it. A new salary line. A vendor change. An accrual timing thing. I went looking for the explanation. I could not find one. I went into the internal ledger Diane had shared with us. I scrolled to operating costs. I saw the line called Discretionary Operational Reserve. I had seen it before. It had been there since 2015. I had never paid attention to it. That night, I looked at it. Not glanced. Looked. The DOR line in 2015 had been $112,000. In 2016, $268,000. By 2018, it sat above $400,000 a year. In 2021, the DOR line was $612,000. I put my glass down. I want to tell you what happened in my body. I did not feel rage. I did not feel shock. I felt a cold, narrow attention, the kind I have only felt twice before in my life, both times in legal rooms. My hand was steady. My breathing slowed. The dog lifted her head, looked at me, and put it back down. That was when I stopped listening to her tone and started reading the numbers. I went back to the donor letters from 2015 to 2021. I pulled the grant restrictions. I cross-referenced the DOR transfers against the restricted fund inflows. The pattern was not subtle once you were looking for it. Restricted donations would arrive, sit in the endowment for 1 to 2 quarters, and then a portion would migrate, through the DOR line, into our vendor account. The vendor account paid invoices to a firm called Halberd Consulting LLC. I had never heard of Halberd Consulting. I pulled the Connecticut Business Registry. Halberd Consulting had been registered in 2015. Sole member listed, Marcus Forsyth, Diane's nephew, a young man I had met exactly once at her sister's funeral in 2017. He had thanked me for coming, in the kind of voice that did not match his suit. I sat at that kitchen island until almost 3 in the morning. I did not call her. I did not email her. I did not write anything down on paper that night. I went upstairs. I slept 4 hours. I woke up. I made coffee. I called my attorney. Silk can be soft and still leave a mark. My attorney's name is Eleanor Vance. She has handled my family's matters since my mother stepped back from active management. She is 63. She wears reading glasses on a chain. She does not raise her voice, ever, in my presence or in anyone else's. She listened to me for 40 minutes that morning without interrupting once. When I was done, she said one sentence. "You do not confront her. You document and we go to the state." I want to be precise about what we did next, because the precision is the story. We did not go to the Foundation's outside counsel. We did not go to the new CPA firm Diane had brought in. Eleanor brought in a forensic accountant from a firm in Boston, a woman named Patricia Yu. Patricia spent 6 weeks on a confidential engagement paid out of my personal funds, reconstructing the DOR line back to 2015. She mapped every transfer. She matched every Halberd invoice to its corresponding restricted fund inflow. She built a timeline. She identified the exact bylaw amendment in 2016 that had given Diane the unilateral authority to authorize the vendor payments under $50,000. We met 3 times during those 6 weeks, always at Eleanor's office, never at the Foundation. Patricia is a small woman, not yet 40, who speaks in numbered points and does not waste sentences. At our second meeting, she opened a binder and slid it across the table to me. She said, "This is what she did. I will walk you through it line by line, but I want you to look at the shape of it first." The shape of it was a sawtooth, a predictable rhythm. Restricted donations would arrive in the first month of a quarter. 3 to 7 weeks later, a portion would be reclassified into the DOR line. Within 10 days of the reclassification, an invoice from Halberd Consulting would post against the vendor account. The amounts were always under $50,000. The descriptions on the invoices were always things like strategic advisory, compliance review, program assessment, words that meant nothing and required no documentation. Patricia had pulled every Halberd invoice, 8 years of them. Halberd had no website, no employees on record, no other clients in the Connecticut business filings. It was a bank account in a strip mall office with a nephew's name on the door. I asked Patricia at our third meeting whether she thought anyone else in the Foundation had known. She did not answer immediately. She said, "I do not see evidence that anyone else participated. I see evidence that 2 people, the prior CPA and the office manager, suspected something at different points and did not have the standing to act on it. The prior CPA retired. The office manager kept the original 2016 minutes in a personal file." I did not know, until that meeting, that the office manager had kept the original minutes. Patricia had a copy. She slid it across the table. The vote count read, "Approved with 3 abstentions." The amended version in the official secretary's file read, "Unanimous." The office manager had been quietly preserving the truth in a file drawer for 6 years. She had never said a word to me. I want to be careful in how I describe her, because she is a private woman and her decision was hers. I think she had been waiting for someone to look. She had not been willing to be the one who pointed. The number Patricia produced at the end of those 6 weeks was $3,979,400, not $47,000. $47,000 had been the visible edge of it, the piece that had failed to absorb cleanly into the 2021 reconciliation. A rounding mistake at the end of a long con. Polished people leave polished evidence. They also, eventually, leave one number that does not round. In March 2022, I filed a confidential complaint with the Connecticut Attorney General's Charitable Trust Unit. Eleanor walked the documents in herself. She wore a gray suit. She did not tell me what she said in the intake meeting, only that the Assistant Attorney General who took the file was a woman she had known since law school. The morning I filed the complaint, I had the seating chart for that year's spring luncheon on my desk. The office manager had emailed me a draft for approval. My name was beside Diane's as usual. I looked at it for a long time. I did not change it that day. I told myself I would think about it. I want you to remember the seating chart. It comes back. The state audit opened in April 2022. It was confidential. It was thorough. The charitable trust unit has the authority to issue subpoenas, to depose, to compel records. They did all three. They subpoenaed Halberd Consulting. They subpoenaed the new CPA firm, who, it turned out, had been recommended to Diane by a college friend of her late husband. They deposed the office manager, who told the truth calmly for 4 hours, including the part about the bylaw amendment minutes that had been edited after the fact. That last detail was new to me. I learned it from Eleanor in late summer 2022. The 2016 minutes had been amended 2 weeks after the meeting to read unanimous rather than approved with 3 abstentions. The amendment had been made by Diane, who, as co-director, had administrative access to the Foundation's secretary records. That was the second open loop. The moment I understood that the betrayal was not just a financial scheme. It was a paper trail she had been gardening, quietly, for years. The minutes, the CPA rotation, the vendor registration, the naming proposal. Each piece placed with the patience of a woman who believed nobody was watching, because nobody had ever needed to. I had needed to. The signature was small. The mistake was not. Through the summer and fall of 2022, I sat across from Diane at 3 different board meetings. I shared a car with her once to a donor's home in Greenwich. I attended her sister-in-law's 70th birthday luncheon and sat 2 seats away from her. She wore a cream blouse that day, with a thin gold chain. She asked about my daughter. I told her my daughter had taken a clerkship in the Second Circuit. She said, "Oh, Victoria, you must be so proud." She put her hand briefly on my forearm. I smiled. I thanked her. I drank my water. I want to tell you something I have never said out loud, because I think it matters. There were nights during that 14-month audit when I sat in my study and asked myself if I was being too patient. If I should walk into her office and put the documents on her desk and let her see the reckoning coming. If the patience was elegance or if it was cowardice in a better dress. I chose the patience because of the donors. If I confronted her, she would have an opportunity to construct a narrative, to call the board members loyal to her, to frame me as ambitious, jealous, in over my head. The donors who had given restricted gifts, some of them in memory of their mothers, their sisters, their daughters, would be caught in the middle of a private war. The state's process protected them. The state's process produced findings, not allegations. The state's process did not require my voice. It required my evidence. I let the state's process work. The 14 months were long. I want to be honest about that too. I did not sleep well. I kept the seating chart from the 2022 luncheon in a drawer. I had not changed it that year. We had sat side by side as usual. She had toasted partnership as usual. I had smiled as usual. I had eaten very little. There were small, ordinary things during that year that I want to mention, because they are the texture of what waiting actually feels like. I bought a new pair of reading glasses, because my old ones had broken, and I sat in the optometrist's chair reading a card across the room and thinking about Halberd Consulting. I went to my daughter's law school graduation in May 2022. I sat in the audience next to my husband. I clapped. I cried. I went out to dinner afterward at a restaurant in New Haven. The whole evening, a part of my mind was in a small office at the Charitable Trust Unit, where I knew, by then, an investigator was reading the Halberd invoices. I want to tell you about a phone call I almost made. It was August 2022, a Friday evening. I had come home from a board meeting where Diane had been particularly attentive to me. She had asked about my mother's health. She had remembered the name of my mother's physical therapist. She had brought me a small jar of lavender honey from a farmer's market she had visited the weekend before, because she remembered I liked it. The honey sat on my counter when I came home. I looked at it for a long time. I picked up the phone. I scrolled to her name. I held my thumb above the call button. I thought, I could end this tonight. I could call her. I could say, I know. I could say, I have known since February. I could say, the state knows. I could give her the chance to step away with what was left of her dignity before the report became public, before her name was attached to the word fraud in any document anyone outside the charitable trust unit would ever read. I did not call. I put the phone down. I poured the honey into the trash. I rinsed the jar. I put it in the recycling. I went upstairs and lay on my bed in my clothes, and I thought about my grandmother and the women who had given the foundation money over the decades, and the women whose programs depended on those funds. The women in domestic violence shelters in Bridgeport, the women in literacy programs in New London, the mothers in the prenatal nutrition cohort in Waterbury. If I called Diane that night, the donors who had given restricted gifts would never know what had happened to a portion of those gifts. The recovery would not happen. The foundation's controls would not be rewritten. The next Diane, in the next decade, in the next institution, would have one more example of a quiet exit, and one fewer example of a clean record. I did not call her. I want you to know I considered it. I want you to know I am not made of stone. I am made of the same tired, decent material as you are. I just had a longer view of the consequences than the phone call would have permitted. In January 2023, the Assistant Attorney General called Eleanor. The investigation was substantially complete. The findings report would be finalized within 90 days. They wanted to know whether I, as the unaffected co-director, intended to remain in my role or step away during the public phase. Eleanor told them I intended to remain. In February 2023, I asked the office manager to draft the spring luncheon seating chart. She emailed me a version. My name was beside Diane's at the center, as it had been every year. The same calligrapher, the same heavy cream stock. I called the office manager into my office. I closed the door. I asked her to move my name to the far end of the table. I did not give her a reason. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment. She said, "Of course, Victoria." She did not ask anything else. I do not know what she knew. I have never asked. I think she knew enough. The luncheon was scheduled for the second Thursday in April. The findings report was scheduled for delivery the same week. Eleanor and the Assistant Attorney General had agreed on a coordinated timing. The report would land at the Foundation's registered address on Wednesday. Diane's personal attorney, a man named Robert Klein, would be served by courier at his office on Thursday morning. The state's notification to Diane personally would arrive by certified mail at her home on Thursday afternoon. The luncheon began at noon on Thursday. I want to walk you through that day, because it is the day everything that had been quiet became visible, and I want you to see it the way I saw it. I arrived at 11:30. The hydrangeas, of course, were on the table. Diane had insisted, again. Cream stock seating cards along the long mahogany, the calligrapher's familiar hand. My name, this time, at the far end. Hers at the head. The donors began arriving at 11:45. Walter Mears was there, 4 years older now, slower with his cane. He saw me at the far end of the table and walked the long way around to greet me. He held my hand for a second longer than he needed to. He said, "Victoria, you look well." I said, "It is good to see you, Walter." He took his seat near the middle. Diane arrived at 12:05. Navy, pearls, the thin gold chain. She moved through the room the way she always did, touching elbows, leaning to listen, raising her chin slightly when she laughed. She paused at her seat at the head of the table. She looked down the length of the long mahogany. She saw my name card at the far end. Her eyes met mine. She tilted her head, just an inch. A small question, a look that said, "Are we doing something different today?" I smiled at her. I gave her nothing. She sat down. The first course was served at 12:15, a consommé. I ate 3 spoonfuls. I do not remember the taste. I remember the sound of silver on china, the low conversation, a woman 2 seats from me asking about a grandchild's wedding. I remember the weight of my water glass. The salad was cleared at 12:40. Diane stood. She raised her glass. She made the toast about partnership, the same toast she had made for 7 consecutive years, with the small variation she added for this audience. She said the foundation's strength was in the women who knew how to listen. She looked at me when she said it. I looked back at her. She sat. The donors applauded politely. At 12:53, the door at the far end of the dining room opened. The maitre d' came in first, with the small, apologetic posture of a man who has been told something is happening that cannot be stopped. Behind him was Robert Klein, Diane's attorney, charcoal suit, a leather portfolio under his arm, a sealed envelope in his hand. I had not known he would come in person. Eleanor had told me the courier would deliver the morning notice to his office and the rest would unfold from there. Robert Klein had made his own decision about the luncheon. He had decided his client deserved to hear it from him, in the room, before the certified mail reached her house. I think in his way he was trying to be kind to her. He walked the length of the table. The conversation thinned and then stopped. Diane saw him. Her face did a small, almost imperceptible thing. She set her wineglass down. She did not stand. He reached her. He bent slightly. He spoke very quietly. I could not hear what he said, and I did not need to. He placed the sealed envelope on the table beside her plate. He straightened. He looked once around the room, the way a man looks who is calculating how to leave with as little additional damage as possible. He turned. He walked back the length of the table and out. The room did not know what I knew yet. Diane sat for a long moment with her hand on the envelope. She did not open it. She did not look up. She picked up her wineglass with her other hand, and her fingers were steady, and she took one small sip, and she set it down. Walter Mears, who had been watching her, turned his head and looked at me. I looked at my water glass. I did not look up. The maitre d' returned. The entree was served. A duck breast, I think, with some kind of fig. Diane did not eat. She held the envelope in her left hand under the table. She made small conversation with the donor on her right, a woman named Helen Gallagher, who had given the foundation $70,000 the year before. Helen, sensing something, kept her voice low and her questions easy. At 1:15, Diane stood. She said she had a small, urgent matter and would return shortly. She did not return. The luncheon continued for another 40 minutes without her. I, as the co-director still in the room, rose at 1:40 and made the closing remarks. I thanked the donors. I spoke about the program work the foundation had funded that year. I did not speak about Diane. I did not speak about partnership. I spoke about the women who had given and the women who had received and the work that connected them. I kept it short. Walter Mears, on his way out, took my hand again. He said, "Victoria, whatever this is, do it cleanly." I said, "I intend to." I rode home in the back of a car with Eleanor that afternoon. She had been waiting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the dining room. She got into the car and looked at me and said, "Are you all right?" I said I was. We rode for a while in silence. She said, eventually, "Robert Klein walked it in. That was unexpected." I said, "He did the right thing for her. I think he wanted to spare her the certified mail." Eleanor said, "He spared her 1 envelope. There will be more." Then she said, "You did not look at her when he walked in. I want you to know that mattered." I asked her what she meant. She said, "If you had looked at her, the room would have understood it as your moment. You did not look. The room understood it as her moment, alone. That is the version that will survive in the donor's memories. That is the version that protects the foundation. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I had not looked at Diane on purpose. I had looked at my water glass on purpose. The water glass was a choice. It was the only choice I made in that room, and it was the right one. The findings report was 312 pages. It documented $3,917,400 in misappropriated funds across 8 years. It detailed the bylaw amendment, the minutes alteration, the CPA rotation, the Halberd consulting structure, the relationship to Marcus Forsyth, and the failure of the new CPA firm to perform substantive testing of the DOR line. It recommended civil action by the Attorney General's office, restitution from the Forsyth estate and from Halberd Consulting, removal of Diane Forsyth from her co-director role, a 5-year prohibition on her serving as a fiduciary of any Connecticut charitable trust, and referral to the IRS for review of the tax treatment of the diverted funds. Robert Klein negotiated. He was a competent attorney. The final settlement, finalized in October 2023, returned $201,000 to the foundation through a combination of personal restitution, a lien on Diane's home in Farmington, and a clawback against Halberd Consulting's accounts. Marcus Forsyth was charged separately. He pled to a single count of wire fraud. He served 14 months at a federal facility in Pennsylvania. Diane was barred from charitable fiduciary roles in Connecticut for life, by stipulation. She was not criminally prosecuted, by agreement, in exchange for the full restitution and her cooperation in the recovery. She moved to a smaller home in a neighboring town. She did not appear at any public event in Hartford again. I want to tell you about the last time I saw her. It was in late November 2023. I was leaving a small bookshop on Pratt Street. She was crossing the street at the corner in a long camel coat with a paper bag from the bakery. She saw me. She stopped. We were perhaps 15 feet apart on a quiet sidewalk on a cold afternoon. She said, "Victoria." I said, "Diane." She said, "I underestimated you." I said, "You did not underestimate me. You assumed I was not paying attention. Those are different mistakes." She looked at me for a moment. She nodded once. She turned. She walked away. That was the last conversation we had. I want to come back, finally, to the seating chart. The cream stock card with the calligrapher's familiar hand. The foundation has had 3 luncheons since the audit. I sit at the head of the table now. The chair beside me has been left empty at each one. Not as a gesture, not as a statement. The board has not chosen a new co-director. We are still discussing the role. The bylaw amendment from 2016 has been reversed. Vendor payments above $5,000 now require dual signatures. The DOR line has been removed from every internal template. Howard Lynette, in retirement, wrote me a 1-line note when the news became public. It said, "I am sorry I did not say more. I had suspicions. I had no proof." I wrote back, "You were not the one who needed to. Thank you for the years." I keep one of the seating cards in my desk drawer. The 2023 one. The one from the day Robert Klein walked into the dining room. My name in the calligrapher's hand at the far end of the table. I do not look at it often. I do not need to. I know what it represents. It represents a woman who chose her seat 3 weeks before anyone else knew the seats were being chosen. There is a question I have been asked in private by friends who know the story. They ask whether I feel any sympathy for Diane, whether the loss of her standing, her name, her social life in Hartford weighs on me. The honest answer is that I feel nothing for her. I do not feel triumph. I do not feel pity. I feel the steady, quiet relief of a woman who has watched a long process complete itself correctly. She did the thing. The records caught her. The state acted. The foundation recovered. The donors were protected. My grandmother's name is still on the door, and the work she started in 1978 is still being done. If there is a feeling I have, it is a private one, and it belongs to the hour after the luncheon, after the donors had gone, after the staff had cleared the long mahogany table. I went back into the empty dining room. The hydrangeas were still in their tall vases. The cream stock cards were still at each setting. I walked the length of the table. I picked up Diane's card from the head. I picked up mine from the far end. I held them for a moment, one in each hand. I put them both back where they had been. I left the room. If you have ever watched someone underestimate you, on purpose, and chosen to let them keep doing it until the right moment, I think you understand what I felt. It was not victory. It was correctness. It was the feeling of a thing that had been off for a long time, being put back where it belonged. The donor luncheon for 2024 is in 3 weeks. The hydrangeas have been ordered. I asked for peonies as well, this time on the side tables. The office manager smiled when I asked. She did not say anything, but she smiled. The seating chart is on my desk. My name is at the head. The chair beside me is, again, empty. We are not in a hurry to fill it. The right partner will come, in the right season, and we will know her by the way she looks at the records before she looks at the room. And if stories like this remind you that silence can be strategy, subscribe to my channel for more stories. Because sometimes the most powerful move is the one made quietly. I am Victoria Ashford Crane. The foundation's name is still on the door. The donors are still at the table. The records finally are clean. Thank you for sitting with me.